The courtroom was silent, but it wasn't an ordinary silence. It wasn't the solemn respect of an audience waiting for justice. It was the kind of silence that weighs on your bones, that fills your throat with an impossible knot to swallow. Jessica Turner felt it in the air, in the way everyone was watching her, some with morbid curiosity, others with a flash of doubt in their eyes, as if they had already condemned her before hearing a single word. Every sound seemed amplified in the midst of that emptiness. The faint click of a pen spinning between the fingers of a journalist, the shortness of breath from a woman in the front row, the rustling of the judge's shoes as he sat down. And then the sheriff's voice broke the tension. "The court is in session." Jessica straightened up. The hard wood of the bench felt cold against her back. She had learned not to let her posture give anything away, but the fatigue weighed on her body. She hadn't slept in days. To her right, her lawyer, Tom Carter, kept his face impassive, but she noticed the subtle clench of his hands against the table. She knew the tension was affecting him too. "We call to the stand officer Caleb Johnson." A murmur spread through the room. Jessica watched him walk in with the same confidence of a man who knew everything was under control. His uniform impeccable, his badge shining under the lights, each step calculated. He took his position on the stand with his back and chin held high. Johnson's fingers rested on the Bible as he raised his right hand. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." His voice was firm, controlled, rehearsed. Jessica felt a stab in her chest. That man was about to lie, and he would do it with the conviction of someone who had done it before. The prosecutor, a man in a gray suit with a stony expression, moved forward calmly. "Officer Johnson, can you describe what you saw the night of the crime?" Johnson took a breath and paused, just long enough to make the audience believe he was recalling the events. "Yes, Your Honor." He turned his head, fixing his gaze on Jessica. "I saw the defendant at the crime scene. Her hands were covered in blood and she was holding the knife." A murmur ran through the room. Jessica didn't blink. She didn't look away. She didn't react with fear because fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She knew everything that had just come out of Johnson's mouth was a lie. An almost perfect lie that sounded convincing, almost. The courtroom was silent, but it wasn't an ordinary silence. It wasn't the kind of calm that precedes an important testimony, nor the respectful stillness of an attentive audience. It was the kind of silence that tightens the air, the lungs wrapped by the skin like a latent threat, a heavy, dense silence. A silence of secrets that no one dared to name. Jessica Turner felt it in every muscle of her body, in the way the eyes of the audience pierced into her, expectant, like predators waiting for their prey to take its last breath. Some looks were filled with compassion, but most were filled with judgment. Someone coughed at the back of the room. A woman in the front row bit her lip, her nervousness reflected in the way her fingers intertwined tightly. The journalists were ready, cameras aimed, microphones on, waiting to capture every word, every gesture. The judge, a man with a stern expression and meticulously combed gray hair, cleared his throat. His right hand rested on the wooden gavel, ready to impose order if the tension in the room erupted. The clock on the wall read 9:02 a.m. The trial was about to begin. Jessica took a deep breath, keeping her back straight despite the weight of the situation. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but the knot in her stomach remained firm. Not because she doubted her innocence, but because she knew that the truth alone was not always enough. To her right, her lawyer, Tom Carter, held a folder full of documents. His face remained impassive, but Jessica knew that slight tick in his jaw. He was as tense as she was. The sheriff moved forward with measured steps and spoke with a firm voice. "The court is in session." Jessica closed her eyes for a brief second, feeling the weight of the expectation in the room. She knew every move she made would be analyzed, every word judged. Then the prosecutor's voice resonated with authority. "We call to the stand officer Caleb Johnson." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Jessica. She saw how the man she had been chasing for months stood up with the same calm as always. Johnson walked to the stand with the confidence of someone who believed he had control. His dark blue uniform was immaculate, his badge shining with the reflection of the lights. Help our channel grow, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the bell to stay updated on upcoming content. We want to know where you're watching from. Comment below. His movements were calculated, precise, neither too fast nor too slow. A man used to lying with conviction. Johnson sat down with his back straight, placing one hand on the Bible. He raised the other in a solemn gesture. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. His voice didn't tremble. It was firm, assured, rehearsed. Jessica kept her gaze fixed on him, studying him, searching for any crack in his armor, because she knew without the slightest doubt that he was about to lie. The prosecutor, a man in a gray suit with a stony expression, slowly walked toward the stand. His footsteps echoed through the room. He stopped just a few meters from Johnson and stared at him for a moment before asking his first question. Officer Johnson, can you describe what you saw the night of the crime? Jessica held her breath. And then, the man she had tried to expose, the one who had set a trap to destroy her, spoke. Yes, Your Honor. Johnson turned his head and looked directly into her eyes. I saw the defendant at the crime scene. Her hands were covered in blood. She was holding the knife. A chill ran through the room. Jessica felt the immediate reaction of the audience. Some leaned forward as if expecting her to break into tears, to crumble under the weight of the accusation. But she didn't blink. She didn't look away. She didn't react with fear because fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to fight. She knew that every word that had just come out of Johnson's mouth was a lie. A lie so polished, so meticulously crafted, it almost sounded convincing. Almost. But there was something in his testimony that didn't fit, and she was about to prove it. Jessica kept her expression impassive, but in her mind, the analysis was relentless. Caleb Johnson's testimony was too clean, too perfect. Every word came from his mouth with the confidence of someone who feared no discovery. But Jessica knew that no one remembered a crime with such clarity, especially not when it was a brutal murder, a chaotic scene, a sea of blood and confusion. She had worked on hundreds of cases as an FBI agent. She had interrogated criminals, witnesses, even serial killers. And if there was one thing she had learned, it was that memories were disordered, blurry, inconsistent. But not Johnson's. His answers were direct, calculated. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter. Because rehearsed lies always sounded better than the truth. The prosecutor continued with his questioning. Officer Johnson, what else did you see that night? I saw the defendant standing over the victim's body. There was blood on her clothes. The scene was clear. Jessica noticed a detail in his tone. A slight pause before saying, the scene was clear. As if he wanted to emphasize it too much. Anyone who had been at a true crime scene is never clear. It's a mess of contradictory details, mixed footprints, blurry traces, confusion. Something in his testimony didn't add up. Tom, her lawyer, crossed his arms. She could feel his tension. Jessica shifted her gaze toward the jury. 10 men and 2 women, most of them over 40. People who probably trusted a police officer's word more than an accused person's, even if she was an FBI agent. She needed them to doubt just a little. That would be enough to start breaking down Johnson's story. The judge, a woman with a stern expression and piercing gaze, nodded at the prosecutor. You may proceed with your witness. The prosecutor stepped toward the witness stand. Officer Johnson, can you describe exactly what the defendant was wearing the night of the crime? Jessica froze. This was her chance. Johnson blinked just for a fraction of a second, but Jessica saw it. She saw it like a hunter sees the tremor in its prey before attacking. I don't remember exactly. Silence. Jessica felt a surge of adrenaline. A small mistake, but enough. You don't remember? The prosecutor furrowed his brow, uncomfortable with the answer. It was nighttime. Everything happened very fast. Jessica leaned forward. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. But not so fast that you're sure you didn't see me with a knife in my hand, right? The air in the courtroom shifted. The jury exchanged glances. There it was, the first crack. Now she just had to break it wide open. The judge slammed the gavel on the table. Order in the court. The murmurs dissipated slowly, but Jessica could feel that the energy in the room had changed. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but in a trial, sometimes all it took was a spark to... Tom stood up. Your Honor, we request the security camera footage from near the crime scene. The judge nodded slowly and turned to the prosecutor. Any objections? The prosecutor looked at Johnson for a moment of doubt, then shook his head. None, Your Honor. Jessica forced herself not to smile. The video footage was her trump card. The screen in the courtroom lit up, and a technician from the prosecution prepared the recording. The timestamp in the corner of the screen showed the exact time of the crime. Jessica watched the image, knowing what was coming. She knew the video would show that at that exact moment, she wasn't at the crime scene. She was somewhere else, miles away. The video advanced, showing Jessica entering her office building at 10:03 p.m. The door closed behind her, and the lobby camera captured every detail. She didn't leave until 3:47 a.m. It was impossible for her to be in two places at once. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge leaned slightly forward. Officer Johnson, how do you explain this? Jessica turned her gaze to Johnson. His jaw was tight, his back rigid, but he didn't blink. That video could have been manipulated. Jessica had already expected this response. They had anticipated every possible excuse. Tom smiled faintly. The video was verified by experts. The metadata confirms it hasn't been altered. Johnson shifted in his seat. Panic had not yet surfaced on his face, but it was close. Jessica sensed it. And there was nothing more dangerous than a man backed into a corner. The weight of the moment was crushing. She could feel it in the stiffness of her neck, in the way her breathing slowed, measured, and deliberate. There was no room for error. Johnson was trapped, but men like him didn't break easily. She needed more. One final blow. But before she could act, her mind pulled her back. 6 months earlier. That night, the air in New York was thick, carrying the scent of rain and the distant wail of police sirens. Jessica walked briskly, her phone vibrating inside her coat pocket. Tell me you have something, she said the moment she answered. The voice on the other end, Eric Lowe, an intelligence analyst, spoke with urgency. I don't just have something, Jess. I have everything. Jessica stopped in her tracks on the sidewalk. Explain. Eric took a deep breath. Offshore accounts, suspicious transactions, bribes disguised as performance bonuses. He hesitated before adding, Jessica, this is bigger than we thought. Her stomach tightened. Who's involved? Silence. Jessica, you're not going to like the answer. A chill ran down her spine. Tell me. Eric exhaled. Caleb Johnson. And at least 5 other officers, all from the NYPD. The world suddenly felt colder. Jessica leaned against the wall of a building, feeling her heart race. She had spent months investigating corruption within the department. But this was far worse than she had imagined. What she expected? How solid is the data? Unbreakable. But there's a problem. Jessica closed her eyes for a moment. Say it. They know we're investigating them. Jessica's jaw tightened. How do you know? I intercepted an internal communication. Johnson is paranoid. He's pressuring his team to fix any issues before anyone asks questions. Jessica felt the weight of her options. She could move quickly and expose everything right away, but without a proper strategy, the corrupt people within the system could manipulate the evidence, destroy documents, or make witnesses disappear. She needed time, but so did Johnson, and he would play dirty. Jessica blinked, returning her focus to the courtroom. Her stomach churned with the memory. Johnson had played his cards before she did. He had turned her investigation into her conviction, and now she had only one chance left. She stood calmly. Your Honor. The judge looked up. Yes, Agent Turner? Jessica felt her own pulse in her ears. I have additional evidence that proves the falsification of evidence against me. Tom opened his briefcase and took out a black folder, placing it on the table with a calculated gesture. Jessica slowly opened it, letting the sound of the paper fill the expectant silence. In this file, she said in a clear voice, there are records of bribery, evidence manipulation, and conversations where Johnson and his accomplices discuss how to fabricate my case. The judge paled and furrowed her brow. The prosecutor swallowed hard, but Jessica wasn't done yet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. I have an audio recording. Johnson tensed. The judge tilted her head. A recording? Jessica nodded. A conversation where Officer Johnson and other department members discuss how to frame someone? The prosecutor shifted in his seat. Who verified its authenticity? Jessica didn't hesitate. The FBI forensic team. Silence fell over the room. A technician from the prosecution team stood up and took the device. The judge gave a slow nod. Proceed. A crackling sound filled the courtroom speakers, followed by Johnson's voice. We have to make it look like it was her. If we don't stop her, we're all screwed. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Chaos. Jessica remained standing, unmoving, watching as Johnson sank deeper into his chair. She had him. She knew she had won. The noise swelled, a tidal wave of voices impossible to contain. The judge struck his gavel 3 times against the desk. Order. The prosecutor shot up from his seat. Your Honor, we request a recess to verify the authenticity of this recording. Tom, Jessica's attorney, stepped forward. Your Honor, the FBI has already analyzed this audio. The prosecution had access to this evidence beforehand. If they wanted to question its validity, they should have done so earlier. The judge narrowed his eyes, weighing the argument. Denied. His voice echoed through the room. The evidence is admissible. The prosecutor clenched his jaw and dropped back into his seat. Johnson, on the other hand, remained frozen. Motionless, Jessica stared at him. His face no longer showed arrogance or coldness. For the first time in the entire trial, she saw him vulnerable. But it wasn't fear. It was anger. The man didn't look defeated. He looked betrayed. Jessica felt a shiver down her spine. This hadn't been just his plan. There was someone else behind it. Someone who had now abandoned him. The judge spoke again. Officer Caleb Johnson, the court finds sufficient evidence to order your immediate detention. The security agents moved forward and the handcuffs snapped around his wrists with a metallic click. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Jessica looked at him one last time, and then Johnson smiled. It wasn't a defeated smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something she didn't. Jessica felt a stab of unease. This wasn't over. The trial was over, but the sense of danger still lingered. The next day's headlines were explosive. Conspiracy in the police. FBI agent falsely incriminated. Corruption in New York. 7 officers investigated. Jessica Turner exonerates her name, but the corruption web just begins to unravel. Jessica looked at the news on her phone while sitting in her usual cafe with a cold coffee in front of her. Eric's message was still on the screen. Jessica, this isn't over. We've found more. The corruption is bigger than we thought. The weight of those words crushed her. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the faces of the people in the courtroom, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, the looks they gave her when the truth was revealed. Some of them had doubted her, had been ready to convict her. And if the corruption web was as big as Eric hinted, maybe not everyone in that room was innocent. Jessica exhaled slowly and unlocked her phone. Eric, tell me what you've got. Her partner wasted no time. Financial files. Bank transfers connecting more officers with the same bribery pattern and something else. What? A pause. Someone asked about you. A chill ran down her spine. Who? I don't know, Eric admitted, but they have power. Jessica felt her heartbeat quicken. Eric, tell me the truth. Am I in danger? Silence. Then Eric's voice dropped, lower, more serious. I don't know, Jessica, but we'll find out. She nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. She ended the call and set her phone down on the table. The steam from her coffee had already vanished. Outside, the city moved as it always did. People rushing by, car horns blaring, traffic lights changing colors without anyone truly noticing. Everything seemed normal. But Jessica knew it wasn't. Not when the truth was buried under layers of lies. Not when names still lurked in the shadows. She glanced at her reflection in the window, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like what she had always been, a hunter. If someone was looking for her, they had no idea what was coming. Jessica allowed herself a small smile, finished the last sip of her coffee, and stepped out into the street. The case was closed, but the real war was just beginning. If this story inspired you, leave a like to support the channel. Subscribe for more content like this.